The flame was supposed to burn forever. That was the promise. A light born in ancient Greece, carried across oceans and time, meant to shine even when the world grew dark. But twice in history that light went out. Not because the athletes failed, not because the people stopped believing, but because humanity itself broke. The year was 1936. Berlin. The world watched a spectacle that was equal parts triumph and warning. The Nazi flag hung over the stadium, the air electric with ceremony and fear. For 2 weeks the games went on, grace, speed, strength, but beneath it all, something was shifting. Nations smiled across arenas even as their governments whispered about war. When the final torch went out in Berlin, no one knew it would be the last for 12 long years. Plans for 1940 had already begun. Tokyo was chosen. For the first time, the Olympics would come to Asia. A symbol of peace, progress, and unity in a world teetering on the edge of disaster. Japan promised a celebration like no other, a bridge between East and West. Architects designed gleaming new stadiums. Artists sculpted medals. Young athletes trained under the rising sun, dreaming of glory. But history had other plans. By 1937, Japan was at war with China. Cities burned, soldiers marched, and the same hands that once built tracks and pools now carried rifles. The idea of peace through sport became a ghost. The world watched, uneasy as headlines turned from sports to slaughter. One by one, nations began to question whether the games could happen at all. In 1938, the International Olympic Committee made a desperate choice. They moved the games from Tokyo to Helsinki, Finland. A neutral country. A chance to save the dream. But the storm was already coming. In Europe, borders trembled. Germany grew louder. Italy sharpened its swords. The world's air filled with speeches and silence. Yet for a brief moment Helsinki prepared anyway. Construction crews worked through the cold. Runners trained on frozen fields. Letters arrived from around the world promising participation, friendship, hope. People needed something to believe in. Then in September 1939 the sky broke. Germany invaded Poland. The world changed overnight. What had been rumor became war. The IOC sent a final telegram, games postponed. A month later another, games cancelled. And just like that the Olympics disappeared. The stadiums stood empty. Flags hung limp. Medals lay untouched in drawers. Athletes who had been preparing for glory found themselves on battlefields instead. Some carried rifles. Others carried stretchers. Some never came back. The flame went out quietly, not with ceremony, but with the slow suffocation of hope. There are photographs from those years, black and white, blurred by time. A young sprinter in a Finnish uniform standing in the snow. A swimmer in Japan staring out at a river that reflected only smoke. They didn't know they would never compete. Their faces look calm, but behind their eyes is confusion, loss, the weight of something unfinished. In 1940, while the world was meant to cheer in Helsinki, the city echoed instead with sirens. The same stadium built for peace became a storage yard for sandbags and ammunition. The Olympic rings, painted proudly on banners, were torn down. The tracks filled with snow. Silence replaced applause. And still, in small corners of the world, people kept training. Out of habit, out of faith, or out of defiance, it didn't matter. In barns, on frozen fields, in empty pools, they moved through their routines as if the world might somehow right itself again. Because for some, the Olympics were never just a competition. They were a symbol that humanity could be more than destruction. By 1944, the war had swallowed everything. The next games were supposed to be held in London. But London was burning. Bombs fell where crowds should have gathered. The same city that was meant to host runners and swimmers was now home to rubble and fire. And still, somewhere in basements, people listened to news on radios and whispered, someday the games will return. Athletes became soldiers, prisoners, refugees. A generation lost its stage. Those who survived would later say that even in the darkest moments, they remembered the feeling of running, of moving freely, of believing that something pure could exist again. In concentration camps, in trenches, in exile, people held on to that image. The stadium. The torch. The crowd. The dream. When the war finally ended, The world crawled out of its ruins, blinking in the light. Tens of millions were gone. Cities erased. And yet, from that silence, one idea resurfaced. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to light the flame again. London, scarred and exhausted, offered itself once more. The city that had been bombed into dust would rise to host the first post-war games in 1948. The stadiums were patched with whatever materials remained. Rations were still in place. Athletes slept in military barracks. But the world didn't care. They just wanted to see the torch burn again. When it did, when the flame returned to the sky after 12 years of darkness, people cried. They cried not for victory but for survival. For all those who never came home. For the lost games of 1940 and 1944. The Olympics had been haunted not by ghosts of failure, but by ghosts of possibility, what could have been, what should have been, what was stolen by war. In archives today you can still find the tickets printed for the 1940 games that never happened. The medals that were never awarded. The blueprints of stadiums that never saw a race. They sit in drawers like relics of an alternate timeline, whispers from a world that almost was. And yet, even in their absence, those games mattered. Because they proved something powerful, that sport isn't fragile. It bends, it breaks, but it survives. Even when humanity loses itself, the dream waits quietly for our return. The flame was lit again in 1948. It burned through Tokyo in 1964. Through Munich, Moscow, Los Angeles, Seoul, and beyond. Each time it rose, it carried the memory of those years when it couldn't. Each time it burned, it reminded the world what happens when peace is taken for granted. The lost games of 1940 and 1944 are more than cancelled events. They are a mirror, showing us how close the human spirit came to being extinguished. But it wasn't. Somewhere in the ashes of war, someone picked up a torch and ran. The flame lived on. The world didn't see it happen. No cameras, no applause, no medals, but it happened. In the ruins of cities where the games were meant to be held, young men and women still ran. In the shadows of collapsed stadiums they still dreamed. A few held onto their uniforms, folded neatly as if the war would end tomorrow and the starting pistol would sound again. Others carried their hopes in silence, hidden beneath the weight of survival. A runner in Poland escaped a prison camp and kept training barefoot on dirt roads. A gymnast in France practiced her routines in a barn while air raid sirens screamed. A boxer in Germany refused to fight for the army, saying he would fight only in the ring. These were not stories of victory but of faith, the faith that one day the world would be whole enough to play again. In 1943, deep in the Swiss mountains, the International Olympic Committee met in secret. They didn't have a stage or a city or even a date. All they had was belief. They sat around a wooden table as snow fell outside, speaking quietly about a time when the guns would stop. When peace returns, one of them said, so will the games. They wrote those words into the minutes as if writing a prayer. It would take 5 more years. When London finally hosted the 1948 games, the world called them the Austerity Olympics. There was no money for luxury, no resources for grand stages. The athletes brought their own food. The British Army provided the beds. The city still bore the scars of bombings, but the people filled those cracks with hope. When the torch was lit, a hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't just ceremony, it was resurrection. For 12 years the flame had been cold, waiting in the darkness, waiting for the world to remember who it was. Now it burned again. Not as bright as before, but steadier, wiser. That moment, that small circle of fire trembling in the London air, was the answer to the ghosts of 1940 and 1944. The games that never happened had still changed the world. They had taught it how fragile peace was, how precious play could be. Even now, if you walk through Tokyo's old stadium or the stone steps of Helsinki's arena, you can still feel them, the echoes of those who should have run there. Their names lost, their dreams unfinished, but their presence still hanging like mist. They are the quiet heartbeat beneath every Olympic anthem, the unseen crowd that never got to cheer. The torch, when it travels today, passes through their memory. It burns for them as much as for the living. For every athlete who never reached the starting line. For every child who grew up under sirens instead of songs. For every dream interrupted by war. When you watch the Olympics now, the flags, the music, the tears, you are seeing not just competition but restoration. Every race is a declaration, we are still here. Every medal is a prayer whispered to those who never got theirs. There's something hauntingly beautiful about that. The lost games remind us that the Olympic flame is not a symbol of perfection, but of persistence. It doesn't mean the world is good. It means the world is trying. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the point of lighting the torch every 4 years isn't to celebrate victory, but to remember what almost disappeared. To honor the ghosts who kept the dream alive when the world went silent. So the next time the flame rises in the night, watch closely. Behind the cheers, behind the cameras, there is a whisper in the smoke. The voices of those who never got to stand beneath it saying quietly, carry it for us. Because in the end, that's what the Olympics are, a relay through time. One generation running for the next. One light passed through darkness. One promise that never dies. And somewhere, if you listen long enough, you can still hear them. The runners of 1940, the swimmers of 1944, moving through the fog of history, carrying a flame that refused to go out. They are shadows now, but noble ones. The kind that stretch far across history, the kind that whisper even when the world grows loud again. They were supposed to compete under flags and anthems. Instead, they became symbols without faces, proof that even in ruin, hope can take shape. If you stand in one of those old stadiums at dusk, when the air is cool and still, you can feel it. The pulse beneath the concrete, the faint echo of applause that never happened. The ghosts are gentle. They do not ask for sorrow. Only remembrance. Every generation inherits that quiet duty. The runners who came after did not know their names, but they felt their absence. Every starting pistol since 1948 carries a ghost's echo. Every medal gleams a little brighter because of the years when there were none. The games that never were became the soul of the games that returned. When the torch travels the world now, it passes mountains, rivers, cities rebuilt from ashes. It crosses borders that once burned. People gather to see it pass, waving flags, taking photos, smiling. They don't think about 1940 or 1944, but the flame remembers. It burns for them, for the boys who never came home, for the girls who grew old waiting to compete, for the stadiums that crumbled in silence. It burns because light means nothing unless it has survived darkness. There is something eternal about that idea. The Olympics are not just a celebration of sport. They are a memory system, a way for humanity to remind itself what peace looks like. Every jump, every stroke, every cheer is a small act of defiance against the part of us that forgets. The lost games are proof that the line between triumph and tragedy is thin, but the will to rebuild is thicker. When the flame lit again in London, and again in Helsinki, and again decades later in Tokyo, the city that had once lost its chance, it was as if the ghosts were watching from the stands, nodding quietly. Their dream had found new voices. Their unfinished stories were being completed by others. That is legacy, not to be remembered by name but to be felt in motion. The photographs remain. Faded posters, medals that were never awarded, blueprints of arenas that were never finished. But those are just artifacts. The real memorial to the lost games is in the living, the athletes who keep running, the crowds who keep believing, the children who still look at that flame and feel something stir. The world will always stumble, that's its nature. But as long as someone keeps that flame alive even for a second longer, the dream survives. And that is what the ghosts of 1940 and 1944 left us. Not sorrow, but responsibility. To remember. To rebuild. To keep running even when the track disappears. So when the torch is lit again, somewhere in the future, under a sky we haven't seen yet, imagine them there, the invisible audience, the ones who never had their moment. Imagine their quiet applause carried on the wind. And understand, the games never stopped. They were just waiting for us to be ready again. Because the flame was never theirs to lose. It was always ours to carry. And so we carry it, through every era, every stadium, every fragile piece we build. The torch moves forward, its light trembling but unbroken, passed from hands that once trembled with fear to hands that now tremble with pride. It is the same fire that once flickered in the ruins, the same light that once refused to die when the world itself seemed to end. In Tokyo 24 years after its cancellation, the flame finally arrived. The same city that had lost its chance in 1940 became the stage of redemption in 1964. When the cauldron was lit, the world saw something larger than sport. It saw forgiveness. It saw a nation rebuilding itself from ashes and choosing to host the world in peace. That single act closed a circle that had begun nearly 3 decades earlier. The ghosts were there, invisible among the crowd, watching a promise fulfilled. The torchbearer that day was Yoshinori Sakai, born in Hiroshima on the day the atomic bomb fell. A man whose life began with destruction, now lighting the flame of unity. The symbolism was too perfect to be accidental. It was as if the universe itself was acknowledging the lost games, allowing history to heal by its own design. The crowd watched in silence as the flame rose, golden and trembling, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the souls of 1940 and 1944 were breathing again. Every game since then has carried that quiet echo. Even in the grandest ceremonies, the fireworks, the music, the flags, there's a moment when the camera lingers on the torch and you can feel it. The stillness, the reverence, the memory of a world that forgot how to play. The lost games became part of the DNA of the Olympics. They taught organizers humility, they taught nations fragility, and they taught athletes gratitude. They reminded humanity that sport is a mirror, and the reflection changes depending on what the world looks like. When peace reigns, the games show grace. When war looms, they remind us what's at stake. Somewhere, perhaps in another world, the 1940 Olympics still exist, in the imagination of those who dreamed them. The stadiums full, the air clear, the athletes running not for medals but for peace. The 1944 Games too, in some quiet corner of history that never happened. London unscarred, the crowd roaring, the torch untouched by smoke. That's the thing about dreams, they don't need to happen to matter. They just need to be believed in. And the belief never died. Long after the war, veterans spoke of it, how they remembered training before the chaos, how they carried that memory into the trenches. One soldier kept a medal he had designed for Helsinki 1940, worn around his neck under his uniform like a talisman. Another, a swimmer from Norway, said that when he dove into the freezing sea to escape enemy fire, he thought of the Olympic pool he'd never reach. It kept him alive. That's the quiet power of these lost games. Their absence became a form of presence. They showed that sport could exist even when the world couldn't. They made the return of the flame not just an event, but a resurrection. Today, when the torch is carried across continents, by runners, by children, by soldiers, by elders, it passes through the lands that once burned. It crosses Finland. It crosses Japan. It crosses Europe, still marked by the old wounds of war. And as it does, it heals just a little. Every hand that carries it becomes part of a chain that began in darkness and continues toward light. That is the real story of the Olympics. Not the medals, not the glory, but the persistence of the flame. It has survived dictators, bombs, pandemics, politics, and time itself. It burns because we keep choosing to light it again. And if you look closely when the torch is raised, in the silence before the crowd erupts, you can almost see them there. The runners who never ran. The swimmers who never swam. The nations that never gathered. The ghosts of 1940 and 1944, standing at the edge of the light, smiling softly as if to say, "You kept the promise." That's all they ever wanted. For the world to remember. For the light to return. For the games to live. And they do. Every 4 years, when the anthem plays and the flame dances against the night sky, they live again, not as names in history books but as breath, as warmth, as proof. The fire still burns. The world still runs. And the ghosts are finally at peace. Somewhere, beyond the noise of modern crowds and flashing cameras, there is a silence that still belongs to them. It lies between the beats of the drums in every opening ceremony, between the cheers that rise and fade with each victory. It's a silence that carries the weight of memory, not of triumph, but of endurance. That silence is sacred. It's the echo left by the games that never happened. The world doesn't speak of them often, but they are the unseen foundation beneath everything that came after. The empty years, 1940 and 1944, gave meaning to every medal won since. Because what the world learned in losing them was simple. The value of peace cannot be measured in gold. If you close your eyes, you can imagine it. The world as it should have been. The banners fluttering, the air alive with song, the athletes walking into a stadium unscarred by war. You can hear the roar of the crowd, see the light catching on their faces. And then, if you listen closer, you can hear something else. The faint hum of history reminding you that beauty, like peace, is fragile. After 1948, the games would never be the same again. They would grow, they would change, they would stumble, but they would never again take their existence for granted. Every flame lit after the war was also an apology, a vow. Never again will the world allow darkness to silence this light. The lost games became mythology. Not the loud kind of myth, the quiet kind, the kind that sits in the corners of history like a shadow that refuses to fade. Scholars still write about them, historians still debate what could have been, but the truth is simpler. They were never lost. They were waiting. They live in the faces of every athlete who marches in the opening ceremony. They live in every torchbearer who feels the heat of the flame against their skin and understands, even without words, what it stands for. They live in the hearts of the people watching at home, who may not know the details but feel the gravity of what this tradition carries. The Olympics are not just games, they are memory performed. They are the world reminding itself that it is capable of something noble, even if only for a few weeks. And the ghosts of 1940 and 1944 walk quietly among the living, unseen but present, each time that memory is rekindled. Sometimes, when the closing ceremony ends and the lights begin to dim, there's a single moment when the music softens and the flame flickers low. In that instant, you can almost feel it. The connection across decades, from the fields of Finland to the ruins of Tokyo, to the rebirth of London, and into the future that keeps unfolding. The flame never really belonged to any one country. It belongs to all who kept believing when belief seemed impossible. To the builders who finished stadiums that never saw crowds. To the runners who trained on roads that led nowhere. To the families who hung medals on walls for races that never began. And perhaps that's the truest meaning of the Olympic spirit. Not victory, not dominance, but persistence. The courage to keep imagining a better version of ourselves, even after everything has fallen apart. The lost games taught the world that the flame can die, but the will to relight it cannot. It is a fragile thing, that fire, a heartbeat in the dark, but as long as even one hand remains to carry it forward, the light survives. So when the next games begin and the torch ascends once more into the night, watch it closely. You'll see more than flame. You'll see history forgiving itself. You'll see ghosts finding rest. You'll see humanity, flawed and brilliant, daring again to believe in peace. And as the stadium roars and the music swells, somewhere in that endless light, the ghosts of 1940 and 1944 smile and fade into the glow. Finally home, finally whole, finally free. And in that light, where the living and the lost become one, the story finds its true ending, not in silence but in continuation. Because the flame, in its endless journey, does not ask for applause. It only asks to be carried. From one generation to the next, through peace and through pain, it crosses the world like a messenger that refuses to tire. Every games that followed, Rome, Mexico, Montreal, Moscow, Los Angeles, Seoul, burned with the memory of those two that never came. Even when the world fractured again under politics or protest, the torch stayed alive. It was a reminder, flickering but defiant, that no matter how far we fall, the act of gathering, of competing without violence, is in itself a kind of miracle. There is something deeply human in that. The understanding that even in chaos, we crave moments of unity. That even when nations disagree, they still send their best and brightest to the same starting line. That the world can't stop breaking, but it can also keep healing, one flame at a time. The ghosts of 1940 and 1944 belong to that miracle. They remind us that light without shadow is meaningless, that peace without memory is fragile. Their absence taught us to treasure every opening ceremony, every anthem, every cheer. To understand that what happens inside those stadiums is not just sport, it is defiance. It is hope made visible. Somewhere an athlete steps onto the track, trembling with nerves. She doesn't know their names, but she feels them. Every breath she takes carries their echo, those who never had their chance to run. When she lifts her eyes toward the flame, she joins their lineage whether she realizes it or not. And when she runs for all of them. In that sense, the games never truly lost anything. They gained meaning through absence. The world lost years but gained perspective. It learned that peace is not a guarantee, that beauty must be protected, and that the act of playing, of gathering in joy, is the boldest thing a civilization can do. So the flame continues, carried through deserts and mountains, through cities rebuilt from rubble, through hands of every color, through hearts that still believe. The light touches faces young and old, rich and poor, and for a few moments they all glow the same. And somewhere in the crowd, between cheers and tears, the ghosts are still there. Not haunting but watching. They are the quiet witnesses to our perseverance, the proof that what was lost can still guide what endures. When the night falls and the flame is finally extinguished at the end of every games, it never really dies. It waits. It listens. Remembers. The smoke drifts upward, carrying the weight of the years that almost erased it, and with it the promise that it will rise again. Because the flame was never just a symbol. It was a memory, a prayer, a heartbeat that outlasted war. And as long as the world still believes in beginnings, it will keep lighting that fire again and again. For Tokyo. For Helsinki. For London. For all the cities that waited in vain. For all the athletes who never stood on the podium. For all the dreams that the bombs could not kill. The flame burns for them. It always has. It always will. And somewhere, in the echo of the crowd, in the hush before the anthem, in the glow that touches every face, the ghosts of 1940 and 1944 finally rest. Not forgotten, but fulfilled. And so it ends where it began, with a flame and a promise. Not the kind written in ink or sealed by nations, but the kind carried in the hearts of those who still believe that peace deserves a stage. The Olympic flame is not eternal because it burns forever. It is eternal because we keep lighting it again. Every spark that leaps from one torch to another is an act of defiance against forgetting. The world changes, endlessly. New wars, new borders, new reasons to divide. But still, every 4 years people gather under the same sky. They march behind flags not to declare power but presence. They walk together not as conquerors but as survivors. They are the children of those lost games, proof that the dream refused to die. When you watch the torch relay move through the streets, through cities rebuilt, through villages that remember, you can see the lineage of all those hands. Fire handed to fire. Hope handed to hope. Some run fast, others slow, but every one of them is part of the same unbroken chain that stretches back to the years when the world forgot how to play. The flame knows. It remembers the years it was hidden, the winters when it had no sky, the days when no one believed it would burn again. It carries those memories like scars, glowing softly beneath the surface. Every time it rises, it's not a celebration, it's a resurrection. Maybe that's why it moves us so deeply. Because the light of the Olympics isn't just about winning, it's about enduring. It's the story of how beauty keeps returning, even when it has every reason not to. In some ways, the games that never happened are more alive than any that did. Their silence gives the others meaning. Their absence makes the present sacred. Without the void of 1940 and 1944, the flame would be only tradition. With it, the flame becomes testament. There is a story told among the old guards of the IOC, of an empty stadium in Helsinki during the war. They say a caretaker, too old to fight, would light a small candle in the press box every 4 years, on the night the games were meant to begin. He would sit alone, watching the light tremble in the darkness, and whisper to himself, "It will return." No one recorded his name, no photograph was ever taken. But when the flame rose again in 1948, it was for him too. For everyone who refused to let the darkness win. Perhaps that's the true power of the Olympics. Not the spectacle, not the medals, but the memory of that candle, fragile, flickering, stubborn, burning in the heart of war. And even now, decades later, as drones fly above stadiums and billions watch on screens, that candle still burns somewhere inside the flame. You can see it if you look closely. It's there in the silence before the fireworks, in the stillness of the athletes' faces as the anthem plays. It's there in the breath of the torchbearer before the final step. The ghosts live there, quiet and luminous, reminding us that the light we take for granted once almost disappeared. When the flame dies at the end of every games, the crowd sighs. Some cry, some cheer, some simply watch. But the ghosts do neither. They just smile. Because they know something the rest of us forget, that the end of the flame is never an ending. It is a beginning. Somewhere, even now, a child watches the ceremony on television and feels something stir. A dream forms, small but bright. Maybe she'll run. Maybe he'll swim. Maybe they'll simply believe in something beautiful. The ghosts nod from the shadows, content. The torch has found another hand. And as the screen fades to black, the world exhales. The games will end. The world will move on. But the flame, the idea of it, will linger in the dark, waiting for the next dawn. Waiting for us to remember that peace, though fragile, is worth carrying. Because it always was. Because it always will be. Because somewhere, in every flicker of light, the ghosts of 1940 and 1944 still burn, not as loss but as legacy. And when the flame rises again, they will rise with it. And as it rises, the world will once again stand still, not out of shock but reverence. A simple fire, carried by hands both trembling and strong, will remind billions of people what it means to begin again. The cameras will focus on the bright orange core of the flame, but if they could look closer, past the smoke in the ceremony, they would see the shadows dancing there too, the echoes of 1940 and 1944, smiling in the glow of the promise they once made. They will always be there. In every torch relay, in every anthem sung with trembling voices, in every heartbeat that waits for the gun to fire. Their absence gave us meaning. Their silence gave us voice. And their loss gave us the will to never stop lighting the fire. There's a reason the Olympic oath begins not with victory but with respect. It's not a competition against others. It's a covenant with time, a vow that humanity will keep striving for something purer than survival. The Lost Games taught us that peace must be practiced, rehearsed, performed again and again until it becomes instinct. When the torch crosses borders, it's not just flame passing through hands, it's forgiveness moving through history. It visits lands once divided by war, cities once reduced to rubble, and each time it does, it carries the message those ghosts left behind. You must keep believing. Even now, as nations argue, as the world trembles under new storms, the Olympic flame moves onward, fragile but fearless. It doesn't care about politics or power. It exists for the same reason it always has, to remind us that, at our best, we can gather as one. That somewhere beneath the noise we still share the same heartbeat. And maybe that's why people cry when they see it. Because deep down we all know what it represents. Not perfection but persistence. The will to keep walking through darkness towards something better. The courage to play again after loss. The quiet faith that light can return, even when we've forgotten how to look for it. The games of 1940 and 1944 will never appear in the record books. No medals. No scores. No names. And yet their imprint is everywhere. They are the invisible pages between the chapters, the pause that gives the music weight. The flame that followed them carries their story, not as tragedy but as testament. Each time it is lit, the world rehearses resurrection. And someday when the last Olympic flame burns its final light, when the games themselves become only legend, remembered in fragments and film, even then the ghosts will remain. They will drift through the smoke of time, unbound by history, whispering the same truth they carried through war and silence. As long as there is one person left to remember, the flame will never die. So the world keeps remembering. The runners keep running. The torch keeps burning. And the ghosts, gentle and proud, follow behind, not haunting us but guiding us step by step, light by light into the next tomorrow. Because the flame is more than fire. It's faith made visible. And faith, once lit, cannot be unlearned. That is the true legacy of 1940 and 1944, the Olympics that never happened, yet changed everything. The games that left no winners, yet gave the world its greatest victory, the chance to begin again. And in that endless circle of light, where the living carry what the lost began, the ghosts of the forgotten Olympics finally fade, not into darkness but into dawn. And dawn always comes. It comes quietly, softly, like forgiveness creeping over the ruins of time. The sun rises over new stadiums now, gleaming arenas of glass and steel, filled with the laughter of children who were born decades after the war ended. They don't know the names of the cities that never hosted. They don't know the athletes who never arrived. But the light that warms their faces comes from the same fire that once refused to die. Somewhere high in the mountains, the torch relay winds its way through the cold air. A runner takes the flame, breathing hard, his eyes bright with something older than ambition. He doesn't know the story in full, few do. But he feels it. The weight of the past in that small, flickering fire. The invisible hands that have passed it along for generations. The ghosts walking beside him. When he lifts the torch higher, the wind tries to take it, but the flame bends and never breaks. It's fragile, yes, but it endures. Like the games themselves. Like us. That's the lesson the lost Olympics left behind, that endurance is not strength without pain. It's the quiet choice to keep moving forward despite it. Those who dreamed of Tokyo 1940 or London 1944 didn't get to run, but they gave the world the courage to run again. Their absence built the stage for everyone who followed. Every time the world gathers to watch a new opening ceremony, fireworks in the sky, dancers on the field, the sound of thousands breathing the same air, the ghosts are there. Not in sorrow but in completion. Their dream is being lived again and again, every time the flame finds a new sky. And maybe that's what immortality truly is. Not being remembered but being relived. When the next games begin, the cameras will pan across the faces of athletes. Eyes filled with nerves, with pride, with something that can't be named. Somewhere in those faces are reflections of 1940 and 1944, the lives interrupted, the stories unfinished. Every step they take now completes a step that was never taken then. Every finish line crossed now closes a race that never began. This is the secret heartbeat of the Olympics. Every victory is shared with the past. Every flame carries the memory of darkness. Every moment of unity exists because once there was none. The ghosts taught us that peace isn't given, it's built. Torch by torch. Hand by hand. Game by game. And so, the flame will keep traveling through deserts and rain, through cities and silence, until the world no longer needs reminding. Until the idea of nations meeting in peace no longer feels fragile or extraordinary, but normal. Until children grow up believing that the games could never stop again. When that day comes, if it ever does, the ghosts of 1940 and 1944 will finally rest for good. They'll fade into the very light they helped preserve. Their story will no longer be one of loss but of triumph. And perhaps, far in the future, when the final Olympic flame is lit for the last time, when the last anthem echoes and the world grows quiet once more, the smoke will rise gently into the sky and dissolve into sunlight. Somewhere in that golden haze, if you listen, you'll hear it, the whisper that began it all. Remember us. Not for what we lost, but for what you kept alive. And then, just before the light fades, you'll see it, the final echo of the flame, trembling but eternal, a single thread of fire running through the centuries, carrying with it everything the world once forgot and finally remembered. The ghosts will be gone. The flame will remain. And the promise will stand. As long as the world believes in beginnings, the light will never die.